I asked the Director General of the prison for permission to practice on other rapists because, I know it sounds perverse, but I was so sure that I would physically assault one of the Nirbhaya rapists. We don't teach these utterly critical competencies and skills without which our children will grow up to rape, will grow up to be violent or bully or commit suicide or become depressed. Because it's not enough to just think of her as Nirbhaya, as a statistic on a heap of statistics. She would have done so many extraordinary things for India.
Leslee, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. So, the 2012 gang rape in New Delhi that happened in December shook the entire world. It shook my world as well because I was the same age as Jyoti, or Nirbhaya as the world knows her. And for the first time in my life did I feel responsible for a crime. I felt guilty and I felt directly responsible for what happened that night. I saw your documentary in 2015, the film that you made on this subject, and I saw it again last night. And what hit me was that your film is still so relevant because so much has still not changed.
I think there is no doubt that the film created a huge amount of awareness. Some say it sparked the movement. Remember, this was pre-Me Too.
Right.
Well, a lot of work's been done over many, many decades to do that. So for me, it's yet another drop of water on the stone that needs to be worn down. Did it do what I intended it to do? Yes, because it let a bomb off in the world, and that's precisely what I intended. I wanted us to sit up and be utterly shaken by exactly what you've just spoken about. And you know what? I so admire you for saying that what that made you feel, that incident, was guilt and responsibility, because we are responsible. We are responsible for rape, for violence of all kinds, and not just gender-based. That's another conversation, but for sure we are responsible. Why are we responsible? Because we teach our children how to think. And it is discriminatory mindset that we pass on to them generationally, cyclically, and that discriminatory mindset is the disease. It's not the violence is just the symptom, the inevitable outcome of the disease. The film was pure and simple this. It was a gateway for me personally. I know it was a gateway for many people to become activists. For me personally, it was the most significant gateway that actually made me change my life completely. I've left filmmaking. I will never make another film because films can only create awareness. We have enough awareness as far as gender inequality and the iniquity of what it is we do to our women and girls across the world. We have enough awareness. What we need is action. Now, what the film did, which was hugely significant for me, was it presented the solution. When you see a problem so clearly, and you see this problem incredibly clearly because I bothered to talk to the rapists. If we want to understand these men, we have to speak to them. We have to hear what it is that motors their actions. And what motors their actions is being taught socio-culturally. Donald Trump, or Mukesh Singh, or Brett Kavanaugh, or Harvey Weinstein, or a rapist anywhere in the world, in any country in the world, is just a happenstance.
Yeah. What shook me the most in the video actually were the comments by the wife of one of the rapists. She said that if my husband dies, I'm going to die as well. What is my life without my husband? And she was so far removed from even acknowledging the possibility that her husband could have done this. What is it going to take for us to empower our girls to at least respect themselves?
It's Akshay Thakur's wife you're talking about. And she was, on the one hand, one of the most fiercely intelligent young women I've ever met. Totally unschooled. Totally, actually, I think, illiterate. But fiercely intelligent. I think she knew her husband had raped. I think she was under no illusions. What she was basically saying is, without her man, she is as nothing. And she is as programmed as any of the men. You cannot remove anyone from socio-cultural robotic programming, which is what happens in India and everywhere else in the world.
Right.
So in other words, how are we going to empower our girls? How are we going to empower our boys who also need empowering? Because you know what we do to them? We straitjacket them. We lead them to commit suicide. We lead them into untold pain.
Yeah.
Let's also think about our boys, right?
Right.
So what has come out of the film for me is that education of a particular sort is missing. There's a missing subject in our education system, and it's really not fit for purpose. We do not teach our children in this world to be empathetic, to value each other, to, if they're boys, express their feelings, be emotionally literate, and be able to control and self-regulate. We don't teach these utterly critical competencies and skills without which our children will grow up to rape, will grow up to be violent or bully or commit suicide or become depressed. So my whole life now is dedicated to bringing this missing subject. We call it social and emotional learning. And I have, over the last 3 years, designed with world experts in the field the most concrete, simple, free, completely free exercises, tools, a curriculum framework, but more importantly, a tangible program. That is a 30-week program for 3-year-olds, another 30-week program for 4-year-olds, and another for 5-year-olds. Because neuroscientists are very clear that this kind of learning has to take place before the age of 6. And if it doesn't, we've missed the bus and we're fighting against hardwiring in the developed brain. So, whose job is it to teach our children that? We leave it to the parents, right? We say it's the parents' job, but the parents are incapable of doing that. That is where we are being so naive and idiotic. The parents are mired in discrimination. The parents are looking at castes below them and being utterly evil about the way they think about human beings, right? They're looking at gender in the same way. They're looking at ethnicity in the same way. So really, you tell me, what is the difference between these 6 men gang raping Jyoti Singh until her intestines are hanging out of her body and throwing her on the side of the road like a piece of old rubbish? What's the difference between according that human being so little value that they can do that and the, for example, Nazis and the Jews? You know, where the Jews were actually in a sort of propagandistic design and strategy called vermin and rats. Why? So they're devalued. The Hutus and the Tutsis. The Tutsis were cockroaches and dogs.
It's a dehumanization.
It's dehumanization. And when I sit with education ministers, here's the question I ask them. Very simple question. You have, as an education minister or as a president or prime minister, you have a duty of care to your youngest citizens. How can you deem it to be compulsory for your children to learn mathematics in a world in which we have calculators, but it's optional for your children to learn how to value another human being? Imagine how much GDP will be freed up if we teach every child between 3 and 6 the foundation that means that they have positive outcomes in life. And that is what this Think Equal program, which I founded and am now leading with every breath I have left in my body. I will continue to do this until every child in the world has this foundation, because it is every child's right.
It's very noble. You know, Elie Wiesel, Holocaust survivor and one of my heroes, said that neutrality, you should never be neutral, because neutrality always supports the oppressor and not the oppressed. When I look at the Nirbhaya case, or gender violence in general, I think that's one of the biggest culprits, people being neutral or apathetic towards what's happening. What is your take on neutrality?
I think Elie Wiesel is absolutely wise, and I think that's true. Although you see, people who are programmed often appear to be neutral because they simply don't act. And they don't act sometimes not because they're apathetic or lazy, but because they believe the wrong thing, because it's so entrenched in them that they cannot free themselves. And whether it is one thing or the other, I have actually stopped worrying about things like that. To be honest, I have stopped putting a great deal of energy in anyone above the age of 6.
That's so interesting.
Because the only thing that is going to change things, the only thing
Right.
that will change things,
Right.
is a new generation of equal thinkers who really do love, not hate. Nelson Mandela said, no child is born hating another human being.
Correct.
A child has to be taught to hate. If he can be taught to hate, he can be
Right.
taught to love. But hitherto, we are not teaching our children to love. Why don't we just start with the 3-year-olds, and by the age of 6, you have created, nurtured, decent, wonderful, caring, loving human beings.
Right.
What more do you want? And guess what? This program is 100% free. We don't charge for anything.
Yeah.
We're a pure philanthropy. We don't charge to train the teachers. We do that for free. So that no country will ever say to us, or network of schools will ever say, we can't afford to do this.
Right.
Of course you can afford to do it. It's free.
It's free. Yeah, absolutely. What is your take on, it's so interesting, the Indian government banning the film. And I was just looking at the irony, when Jyoti was on her the last few hours, she was sent outside of India to Singapore. A few hours before your release, you had to leave India. And I was just looking at the parallels of that and the avoidance of acknowledging something that's happening in the country. What was going on through your head at that moment, and how do you reflect back on that?
Well, at the time, I must say, I was utterly furious and heartbroken. And I was just completely shocked. It's the last thing in the world I expected.
Yeah.
And the arrows came from really
Activists,
some pretty shocking quarters.
Yeah.
The feminists of India, they are the ones who actually called for the ban in the first place. Having said that, I fully understand now that I'm more mature, why and how that comes about, because they are fighting such strong battles that every centimeter of ground gained for them is precious and sacred. So to see anything taken from them, even though it's a very selfish response, it's an understandable human response because they have fought so hard for what they've gained. As far as the government's concerned, when I discovered that it was the feminists that had called for the ban, I kind of understood a little better why a government would shoot itself in the foot when it was being praised for being the only country in the world that has ever stood up so passionately. There was more to praise India in that film than to bury it, frankly.
Yeah, true.
And yet, this hysteria was whipped up.
You talked about maturing ever since you made the documentary. I had a similar feeling of maturing because when I first saw the film and I saw the interview of Mukesh Singh, the rapist in Tihar jail, I wanted to enter the screen and strangle him. When I saw it yesterday, I saw it last night, I was in my 20s then, I'm in my 30s now. I suddenly didn't feel the need to strangle him or do anything to him because I realized if he knew better, he wouldn't have done it in the first place. But what was it like for you? And I heard that you spent hours and hours and hours in that jail interviewing him along with several other rapists. What was going through your head at the time?
So I spent 31 hours over a number of weeks with 7 rapists.
7.
And one of the rapists I spent time with, called Gaurav, had raped a 5-year-old girl. What really shocked and surprised me was that I did not feel like strangling any of them, and I thought I would. The reason I interviewed Gaurav, who's not in the film, I interviewed 4 rapists who are not in the film and were never going to be. The reason I interviewed them was that I asked the Director General of the prison for permission to practice on other rapists because, I know it sounds perverse, but I was so sure that I would physically assault one of the Nirbhaya rapists that I thought I've got to, feel my way through how I'm going to handle the interviews and see, because if I hit one of them, let me hit someone I don't need for my film. That's literally what was going through my head as a filmmaker, right?
Incredible. So that's why you went through that process?
Yes. And I went through it fully with the cameras, with everything exactly in the way we were going to be interviewing Jyoti's rapists.
That's right.
But this was a practice run. And here is the astonishing thing. I felt no anger. Not even anger. And why actually did I think I was going to strangle one of them at least? Because I was raped when I was 18. And I thought that all of this fury and anger would come up surface, and that I wouldn't be able to control my fury. I felt no anger because it wasn't appropriate, because it was so obvious. And when you watch the film with maturity, you realize these men have been totally programmed. When they're asked the questions, what is a good girl? What is a bad? These are textbook answers that their fathers and mothers have taught them. How can you, knowing that, not sit there actually thinking surprising thoughts like, who should have intervened in your childhood? Whose fault is it that you have grown up to believe that if a girl acts outside of this restricted patriarchal structure, she not only deserves to be raped, but you have a duty to rape her? So I didn't feel all of those feelings that I imagined I would, just in the same way as I was shocked to find these were ordinary human beings, as the prison psychiatrist says, who knows them much better than I do. These are normal men with antisocial tendencies.
What's interesting is when I saw the film, ML Sharma, the defense attorney, compared a woman to a flower, and if you leave a flower in a gutter, it's going to get spoiled. So, I sort of laughed it off, and I said, well, he's a defense attorney. Of course he's going to say that. I went to India the next week, and I met one of my aunts who hadn't seen the film. And we were talking about the case, and she said, look, Kovid, if I have gold jewelry and I leave it outside of my house and someone takes it, it's my fault.
There you go.
An urban, educated woman, a mother, said these words.
And you see, this is so spot on. You get it, because they are programmed to do that. He's not doing that because he's a defense lawyer trying to defend his client. The client by then was slam dunk in jail, sentenced to death. There was no defense any longer to be made. He believed every word he was saying. Just as the other lawyer, AP Singh, believed it when he said, if my daughter behaved like Jyoti Singh had behaved, I would take her to my farmhouse in front of my whole family. I would pour petrol on her and burn her alive. We have created those minds. We have taught these men to think that way.
Something else I noticed when watching the film was the sheer strength of Jyoti's parents. There was a part where her father talked about how he taught her how to walk and then he had to burn her body. Being Indian, I know it's every Indian parent's dream that their child is going to burn their body and not the other way around.
That's right.
Where do you think they derive their strength from? Where do you derive your strength from? After going through so much, how do you muster the courage to keep going?
I think from the point of view of where they derived their strength from, it's 100%, it was from Jyoti. She was an extraordinary young woman. And I wish, my deep regret about the film, one of the deep regrets, a filmmaker always has deep regrets, but one of them was that I was not able to put on that film her best friend Aditi's statement. Her father and brother persuaded her not to come on film because, even though she was her best friend, they didn't want her associated with a rape victim. Isn't that horrific? Isn't that just vile? But what she had to say about Jyoti cracked my heart in two, because that told us everything we needed to know about who Jyoti was, what we've lost. Because it's not enough to just think of her as Nirbhaya, as a statistic on a heap of statistics. She would have done so many extraordinary things for India. This dream of building a hospital, I know she would have built it because everything I heard about her from, not just her parents, obviously, but her best friend, that testimony was just extraordinary, and I wasn't allowed to put in the film. Anyway, they derived their strength from her. It was her strength that infused itself in them and enabled them to say, I don't care what my brother's saying, that I'm mad to sell this piece of land to educate a girl, I'm doing it. Where do I derive my strength from? Absolute certainty. I am absolutely clear. I know I'm right about this. I know that we have been utterly negligent and irresponsible and continue to be in just talking about this without taking action. Look at the Convention on the Rights of the Child from 1924. Look at the Human Rights Declaration. They are worthless if we don't put them into action. Boys of 9 now are getting addicted to pornography.
True.
What are we doing about that?
Yeah.
Let me tell you, the day that was almost the worst day for me was when I saw that Modi had lifted the ban on the pornography sites that he had previously banned.
Yeah.
Well, I then watched, while my film was banned, Modi lift the ban on those sites because the men in India were screaming, free speech, you can't ban our pornography sites, what about free speech and democracy? And the film that I'd made, this plea for, tolerance and love and ending violence against women, still banned.
Yeah.
It's actually shameful. That ban should be lifted now. It's ridiculous.
Right. Very true. Leslee, thank you so much for taking out the time. Really appreciate talking to you, and I think this is going to be inspiring for many viewers.
And thank you also for your beautiful insights. You've said some really wonderful things that have touched me. So thank you.
Oh, thank you.
For
Thank you
that
so much.
also.
Thank you.